All right, welcome everyone. My name is Charles Jones, and I am the author of Emotional Intelligence for Stress-Free Leadership and a chapter of Innovations in Leadership Coaching. And over the past 40 years, I have developed a groundbreaking new theory of emotion, specifically what emotions are and what to do with them. And if my theory is right, and at this point I have thousands of data points suggesting that it is, then the theory of emotion taught in psychology textbooks, mainstream therapies, pop psychology, emotional intelligence courses, social emotional learning, and mindfulness training programs is fundamentally incorrect. What's more, adhering to this misunderstanding leads to emotional distress, by which I'm grouping stress, reactivity, negativity, self-pity, and procrastination. And what this really means is that the very techniques that we've been using to manage our emotions are, in fact, reinforcing the very misunderstanding that's causing our emotional distress. And that's the tragedy. The good news is that correcting these misunderstandings resolves these emotional issues while improving our ability to flow through life as a force of nature. And in today's webinar, I'm going to introduce you to my theory about what emotions are and what to do with them. I'm going to show you why negativity and self-pity are signs that you are misinterpreting what your emotions are trying to tell you. And I'm going to teach you a technique you can use to resolve any painful emotion while accelerating your healing and growth. It's a lot to cover, so strap in for what several participants have described as one of the most enlightening and empowering 90 minutes of their life. And I'm going to share this new theory of emotion with you, and then I'm going to give you a chance to apply this new understanding to resolving an instance of frustration in your life. So in preparation for that, I'd like each of you to identify a situation in which you are currently experiencing some frustration. It could be in your personal life, it could be in your work life, and take out a piece of paper, open up a window in your computer, and write down, I feel frustrated because, and explain why you feel frustrated. So go ahead and begin. Okay, so put your paper away for the time being. I'll have you bring it out in a few minutes. And I'm now going to show you what your emotions are and what to do with them. And the first, the first thing to understand is that in order to understand what your emotions are, it's imperative that you understand the relationship between your conscious mind and your subconscious needs. Now, you have two types of subconscious needs, biological needs and psychological needs. You're already familiar with your biological needs. These are things like eating enough food, drinking enough water to stay hydrated, and having enough sex to get your genes into the next generation. Your biological needs do their best to fulfill themselves on their own. However, when they cannot fulfill themselves on their own, they will request help from your conscious mind, and this request will take the form of a painful sensation. For example, if your blood sugar drops, you'll start to feel hungry, and that hunger will get louder and louder until it gets the attention of the conscious mind and causes you to stop whatever else you're doing and, get up and find some food. Similarly with thirst, and so on. Pleasurable sensations arise when you are on track to fulfill one of your biological needs. For example, let's say you're hungry, you get up from your desk, and you start to put some food in your mouth, and it tastes extremely delicious, right? This is your subconscious encouraging you to continue eating until you have consumed enough food. Thirst works in the same way, and I don't have to tell you how nature, your biology, keeps sex extremely pleasurable until it's taken its shot at getting your genes into the next generation. So the key thing to understand here is that your biological needs use painful and pleasurable sensations, kind of like a stick and a carrot, to get you, to the conscious mind, to turn your attention to them and do what you can to support them in fulfilling themselves. And our emotions work in the same way, but with psychological needs. So in this presentation, I'm going to present 7 psychological needs that we all have. But there are many more. Know that there are several dozen needs. The psychological need that likely drives much, if not most, of your behavior at work is our need to achieve the goals that we've set for ourselves. These can include hitting our numbers, delivering our project on time, and we want to achieve these goals while protecting our assets, whether that's our headcount, our budget, our job, and to do so while we mitigate whatever risks we may see, such as disruption in our supply chain, stuff like that. And since we work with other people, we will have a need to assert our rights, our right to receive credit for our work, our right to have a job outside of work, or a life outside of work, a right to hold people accountable for not fulfilling their promises to us. And another very important need for being a social being is to elicit the respect and consideration we believe we deserve from others. Super important for healthy relationships. And of course, we want to meet these needs through ethical means, and doing this while we live up to the ideals. We personify the ideals of being a good employee, a good sister, a good this or a good that all of us have. Now, most of the time, our subconscious fulfills these psychological needs without the help of our conscious mind. For example, if you've ever had the experience of driving home from work and you get home and you realize you weren't consciously aware of having driven home, it's because likely your subconscious needs to achieve your goal of getting home on time while protecting your assets and mitigating your risk, that your subconscious needs have been doing the driving. If you do remember scenes from your ride home, it's likely because one of your needs ran into a problem. Like, let's say you hit traffic on your way home and suddenly you felt frustrated because your subconscious need to achieve your goal of getting you home on time is now no longer sure that it's on track to do so. And the goal here is to get the attention of your conscious mind so you can figure out how to get back on track to get home in time for dinner. Or let's say you're driving along, it's raining, and suddenly the car hydroplanes, and there's this huge jolt of fear from your subconscious. Well, that's your need to protect assets, sending up a distress call asking for assistance in how to keep you and the car safe. And just as there's one-to-one correlation between a painful sensation like hunger and an underlying biological need to eat food, there's a one-to-one correlation between your emotions and the underlying psychological need. So if your frustration, it's always because your subconscious has the assessment you're not on track to achieve a goal. If you're afraid, it's always because your subconscious has the assessment you're not on track to protect an asset. Anxiety, you're not on track to mitigate a risk. Anger, you're not on track to assert a right. Resentment, you're not on track to elicit a consideration. Guilt, you're not on track to uphold an ethic of yours. And shame, you're not on track to personify an ideal of yours. So the point here is that emotions are data regarding your own effectiveness. Painful emotions alert you when you're not on track to fulfill a psychological need. Pleasurable emotions inform you of psychological needs that you are on track to fulfill. Painful emotions calling you to shift your conscious attention to the underlying need and resolve the painful emotion. And pleasurable emotions are, hey, you're doing great, keep going, step on the gas, and keeps that experience pleasurable until you have fulfilled the psychological needs. So in the next part of the presentation, I'm going to show you how to use this new understanding to resolve any painful emotion while improving your effectiveness. Okay, so let's proceed. I'm now going to illustrate how you can use this new understanding to resolve an instance of frustration. So let's say you're driving in the car and suddenly you hit traffic, you're on the way to an appointment, and boom, your first thought might be to think, oh, I'm frustrated because of the traffic. The traffic is so frustrating. But now that you've been through this presentation, you know that your frustration isn't a function of what's happening out there in the world, but rather whether or not you're on track to meet your needs, given what's happening out there in the world. So your subconscious, which processes information 250,000 times faster than your conscious mind, is the first to understand that the traffic might represent a situation in which you're no longer on track to get your appointment on time. So it sends up a flare of frustration. And when it does, it gives you three, at this point, you're now in the question, oh, well, how do I resolve my frustration? And there are three basic ways. And this is an acronym, ACT or ACT, to help you remember what those three ways are. So the first thing is you've made a number of assumptions that have brought this need to achieve this goal into being. So those assumptions include, okay, I need to, get to this meeting on time, it's important that I'm at this meeting. This is a goal I need to achieve. I absolutely need to get to the meeting on time. Is that true? You might pick up the phone and find out that your friend's also running late. And if you get there 15 minutes late, it's no problem, at which point your frustration would resolve. Maybe it's a meeting at work and it would work just fine if you were arrived to that meeting by phone and they put you on speakerphone. So you look at your assumptions for why you believe you need to achieve this goal. And so that's the first place that you would look. The second place is you could change your criteria that you've been using to evaluate whether or not you are on track. So what told you that you were not on track? You hit traffic, but does that really mean that you're not going to get your appointment on time? Maybe you pull up your GPS and plug in your destination, and lo and behold, it shows that even with the traffic, you're going to arrive to your destination 5 minutes before the meeting starts. So you're fine. And again, your frustration resolved. Or you can change your tactics. What might you do? Well, there's two basic options. You can try to change the circumstances that have precipitated your frustration. Okay, there's a traffic jam. Maybe there's an accident ahead and people are rubbernecking, and you can just lay on the horn and honk really loud and see if you can get the people in front of you to start moving faster. Or you might take the risk of driving on the shoulder to get ahead of the cars, or your GPS has told you, hey, there's an alternate route, and if you get off at the next exit, you can take surface roads and get there on time. So those would be all examples of tactic changes that you can make. So whichever one you choose, you will not only be resolving your frustration, but you'll also be up-leveling your productivity. If you decide to drop your goal of getting the meeting on time and put your attention somewhere else, create a different goal, put your attention on that. If you you know, going in the future, you might decide just to use your GPS as the criteria to evaluate whether or not you're on track, avoiding several instances of frustration. Or you may discover, hey, this alternate path I took to my meeting, it's actually a better bet. And that's what I'll be doing in the future. So the idea here is, and this applies to any of these emotions. So the point I'm trying to make here is, you know, when a painful emotion arises, if you have this understanding, you don't want to, quote, manage that emotion. You don't want to talk yourself out of it. You don't want to suppress it. You don't want to take some deep breaths, stuff like that. The emotion is information, it's data, it's trying to help you. You want to actually feel into the emotion, figure out what the underlying need is, and make an adjustment to your subconscious programming so that you are more effective, right? So, so I hope at this point I've shown you kind of what emotions are and what to do with them. And I'm now going to show you why negativity and self-pity are signs that you're misinterpreting what your emotions are trying to tell you. So the problem that people have is that most of us have been trained, educated since birth, to interpret our emotions through what I call the circumstantial view. Something happens out there in the world, you know, you hit the traffic, you immediately feel frustrated, and you erroneously conclude that the reason you're frustrated is because of the traffic, right? You're completely oblivious to this process that happened in between, where your subconscious is evaluating what the implications of this change in circumstances are. And there are three basic problems with that you set yourself up for when you interpret an emotion through the circumstantial view. The first is that it creates negativity. If you are blaming the traffic for your emotional pain, you're going to be in a negative frame of mind. So whenever we attribute a painful emotion to something that's happening in the world, whether it's a judgment like she's so frustrating to work with, or I resent the way they're treating me, I'm worried that things will only get worse, and I feel guilty about what I did, these are all misinterpretations of what our emotion is trying to tell us. But yet I bet that as you look at these, you probably resonate with some of these statements as things that you have heard other people say, or that you have said, or that you have thought. But whenever we're thinking in this way, no, it's not that she's so frustrating to work with. It's that I'm not on track to achieve a goal of mine. If my focus was on achievement of the goal, I'd be in a positive state of mind and looking for a solution instead of thinking what a nasty person this is or whatever. Likewise, if I'm in the circumstantial view and I'm interpreting my resentment as, hey, I resent the way they're treating me, rather than understanding that, hey, it's my responsibility to elicit the consideration and respect that I want from others. How do I get better at that? Thinking that the reason that you're anxious is because something may or may not happen in the future leaves you as kind of an emotional victim of life, rather than, hey, what if this happens? Rather than leaving that as a rhetorical question from your subconscious, but actually thinking about what you would do in that worst case scenario and putting a plan in place that might require you to take actions in the present in preparation for that is a much better way to respond to your anxiety. And likewise, feeling guilty about something you did in the past where you can't change the past doesn't help anyone. Understanding that you feel guilty because you have yet to make amends in the present, that can move you in a positive direction. So when you misinterpret an emotion through the circumstantial view, it creates negativity, and that negativity shows up as blame or being judgmental in some way. And as you know, anytime that somebody is kind of pointing the finger at you and blaming you for their emotions, that tends to be highly destructive to the quality of your relationships. The second reason why you don't want to misinterpret emotion through the circumstantial view is that it limits your options, it conceals options. For example, this supposedly gifted boy is interpreting his frustration through the circumstantial view and believes that the reason he's frustrated is because the door won't cooperate with him. So he just pushes harder and harder. It doesn't occur to him that maybe the approach he's taking isn't effective, or it doesn't occur to him to look for workarounds, like going to another door on another side of the building. Nor would it occur to him to say, well, do I really need to go to school today? Maybe I'll just like skip school, play hooky, do something else fun instead, kind of thing. He's just dead set on just pushing harder and harder against the door. And I think this is such a classic cartoon because we recognize this tendency in us, right? And then the third reason is that if you're convinced that the reason you feel the way you do and you're in emotional pain is because of the way things are, and you can't change the way things are, then you'll start feeling sorry for yourself. Poor is me. What can I do? The world is this. This person is blah blah blah. Right? We begin to think that we're powerless to do anything about our emotional pain. So, and when we're in this state, we will, which psychologists called brooding rumination, we will tend to look for ways out of our emotional pain that don't involve actually resolving the emotion, but perhaps subduing the emotion with a drug or engaging in a high dopamine activity to take our mind off of our emotional pain. And if this goes on long enough, we're at risk of addiction, anxiety disorders, and depression. So the point is, you don't want to fall into the circumstantial view, right? Unfortunately, this view is so deeply ingrained in us, right? This is a part of our sort of cultural conditioning. And human beings for the last 2,600 years have been sort of caught in this circumstantial view of what their emotions mean. And but if you do find yourself in the circumstantial view, so our default around many emotions will be immediately to go to the circumstantial view, is to return our attention to the emotion that we've misinterpreted through the circumstantial view and reinterpret it through what I call the effectiveness view, right? I'm experiencing this emotion because my subconscious has the assessment that I'm not on track to fulfill some need of mine. And the advantages here are this creates accountability. I now am responsible for how I feel. It reveals many more options. Even if I can't change the precipitating circumstances, I can't get that door to work, I can find other ways to resolve my the painful emotion. And when I do, this will be an up-leveling in my effectiveness, not just in this situation, but in similar situations going forward. So now, please take out the piece of paper on which you wrote, I feel frustrated because, and take a look at that and ask yourself whether or not you were interpreting your frustration through the circumstantial view, in which case it's likely you have some blame or judgments, or perhaps even some self-pity or a sense of powerlessness to do anything about it, or whether what you wrote down makes it clear that you understood that the reason you're frustrated is because you're not on track to achieve a goal of yours. So just take a minute and honestly look at your example. All right, and now how many of you wrote down something that is in part or whole in the circumstantial view? Just raise your hand. Deeply conditioned tendency. And actually I've asked this question with thousands of people, and frustration is actually the emotion people are most likely to interpret through the effectiveness view. Other emotions, it's even worse. Like anger, it's less than 10% understand that their anger is related to the fact they're not on track to assert a right of theirs. And a good portion of those people tend to be lawyers, right? Because law is all about asserting rights and eliciting consideration. That's why we have laws. So, okay. So in the next, what I want you to do now is rewrite your explanation of why you feel frustrated using this sentence starter. My subconscious is frustrated because it has the assessment that I'm not on track to achieve my goal to blank. So go ahead and take a minute to rewrite it. All right, so I have, I hope you agree I've fulfilled these objectives here in this time. And you've just begun to scratch the surface of something I call, what I've called emotional responsibility and response-ability. And really has three components: taking responsibility for your emotions as feedback regarding your own effectiveness. It's not about what's happening out there in the world. How effective am I being, right? And then having the ability to respond to those emotions. So we've given you a taste of how you would do this with this instance of frustration, right? How can you respond to it and resolve the underlying need? And to do so in such a way that then every emotion becomes an opportunity to up-level your performance, to increase your performance, right? So this isn't, so much an emotional regulation or management system. You don't want to manage your emotions any more than you want to manage the check engine or low fuel light on the dashboard of your car, right? This is instrumentation. It's like, if you mindfully watch the low fuel light go on and the fuel will go down and take no action, right? Which is sort of the mindfulness approach to it, you're going to run out of gas, right? These emotions are there to tell us something super vital if we know how to interpret them. And I now like to give you kind of a sense of what it's like to live in this kind of state of emotional responsibility. And so imagine for a moment that you, the conscious mind, are the leader of an organization called the self, and that your subconscious needs are your direct reports, so to speak, okay? And let's say a friend calls you up and says, hey, I'd really like to treat you to dinner. And immediately your need to seize opportunities gets super excited. And then right on the heels of that, you feel anxious. And you listen to your anxiety and it's like, what if they take us to that horrible Chinese restaurant they took us to last time, right? Like, didn't enjoy that at all. Like, that's a risk. So how do you mitigate that risk? So the first idea that comes up to you is, hey, I could, just proactively say to them, hey, I'd love for you to take me to dinner. Any chance we could go to that new Thai place on Main Street, right? As you're thinking about doing that, you start to feel, yeah, that would mitigate the risk. I think it's likely they'll say yes. And you go ahead and say that to them and they agree, yeah, I've heard great things about that place. Let's meet there. So you agree to meet there at 7 p.m. and you arrive and you have this absolutely delicious, delicious meal, great conversation. And when the check comes, your friend says, hey, how about we split the check? boom, there's a what the blank, and you immediately feel resentful, right? This person invited you to dinner, said they were going to take you out, and now you have a conversation with your need to elicit the consideration you think you deserve. And your first idea is, okay, why don't I just remind her that she offered to treat me to dinner? And as you're thinking about that, you start to feel some guilt because you have a really strict ethic that you never want to embarrass somebody, particularly a friend, and you worry that pointing this out will embarrass them. And as you think about it a little bit more, it's like, yeah, but if the roles were reversed, I would want my friend to remind me that I promised to treat them rather than split the check with me and be resentful. So you actually make a little adjustment to your subconscious programming, and you actually see yourself as being virtuous by reminding your friend of what they offered. And so as you then think about saying that to your friend, your little mitigate risks need pops up and says, yeah, but what if my friend's offended by that? And as you think about it a little bit more, you say, like, I don't think she's going to be. She's a good friend. She's not going to be offended if I do that. And then your mitigate risk needs pushes back a little bit and says, but what if she does? Well, if she does, then I guess she's not as good a friend as I thought. If she can't get over it, she's offended and stuff, and I can live with that consequences. So mitigate risk is, okay, green light from me to go ahead and proceed. And you go ahead and decide to ask your friend, remind them, hey, when you invited me out and offered to treat me, I thought that meant you'd be picking up the check. Did I misunderstand? And she's like, oh no, I'm so sorry. I did intend to treat you. I've just in such the habit of splitting the check that I forgot. And you're like, no worries. That was a really great meal. Thank you very much. You're feeling quite grateful. And she says, yeah, let's do that again soon. And you say, yeah, and this time I'll pick up the check. Right? So the point here is, in a situation, if you have this dialogue going on with your subconscious needs, and you understand how to interpret their emotions and how to work with them to adjust their programming, then you can flow through these sometimes sticky situations or situations that may have stressed you out in the past with a great sense of ease. So, makes sense? Any comments seeing that? Does that help kind of bring this dynamism of what's going on below the level of your conscious awareness into view? Okay, so let's see. I got to go back to my other presentation for a second. And all right, so when you live in this, I've just kind of given you a taste of it, but when you are in this state of emotional responsibility, you are grounded in your body, composed in your mind, accountable for your affective state, how you feel, continually up-leveling your effectiveness, and resolute in your decisions and actions. And you basically flow through life as a force of nature, right? Now, if you're not in this state and you're caught in the circumstantial view to kind of any degree, life is very different. Life can be very stressful. Anytime you have stress, and I don't have time to tease out all these in this little webinar, but it's actually due to being in the state of emotional victimhood. If you're reactive, fight, flight, freeze, appease response, again, you're not in the state of emotional responsibility, you're in a state of emotional victimhood. Negativity, we talked about that a bit, and how if you're in blame or judgment, it's because you're interpreting an emotion through the circumstantial view. Self-pity, thinking you're powerless to resolve your emotions. Again, you're caught in the circumstantial view. And then we end up talking a little bit about procrastination. So if you want to move from the left to the right, it requires a little bit more than having an intellectual understanding that your life would be better if you lived in the effectiveness view. For that reason, I've created a 5-part method called the tenor method, where each step in the tenor method, it's kind of a certain kind of mindfulness discipline, shifts you from what's on the left to what's on the right. And today I introduced you in the context of frustration to how to own your needs to shift from negativity to accountability, and how to work your ACT to generate options to pull you out of self-pity and toward, up-leveling your own performance. This is just a quick little chart on, if you're not being emotionally responsible, there are short-term and long-term costs of it. The cost of leaving the emotion unresolved, these, show up pretty quickly. And then if it goes on too long, this is what happens on the right. There's a real loss of, your humanity. These needs are the building blocks of your humanity, and you lose touch with it if you are dissociating from the need behind an emotion. And a lot of the emotion regulation strategies that are out there actually produce what's on the right, right? They're not helpful. They're actually hurtful to us. So I offer some courses through Guidely. One is Foundations of Emotional Responsibility, and this is a 5 2-hour classes over the course of 4 weeks in a day, and in between you practice the tenor steps. So it kind of gives you this kind of overview of really how to work with your affective state. And I have a cohort that starts a week from today, a week from tomorrow, on Friday the 11th, and meets for 5 consecutive Fridays, except for the Friday after Thanksgiving. Also have a course on how to reconstruct your self-esteem, and that really goes into this notion that behind shame is an ideal that you're not on track to personify, and really examining those, rewriting them, and getting yourself on track to personify those ideals so you can feel proud of yourself and be an admirable person. And then another emotion that people tend to really get stuck with is resentment. So I have a course on how to get the respect and consideration you deserve, the same format. And there you really learn some kind of proven techniques for how to elicit the respect and consideration that you believe you deserve. And I also offer one-on-one coaching on pretty much anything in the arena of what we've been talking about today. And I'd love to hear from each of you as we check out what was the single most valuable thing you learned. Okay, so I want to close with a poem, and I'm sure many of you have heard this poem before, but listen through like the lens of today's webinar. This being human is a guest house, every morning a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture, still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. Or I would say your subconscious, but yes. So, well, thank you for attending. And if you're interested in learning more about emotional responsibility or doing some work in this area, I have a guide page on Guidely, and you can sign up there.